U.S. Navy has always been the iron will of a proud and mighty nation pushing forward through the currents. The Navy has never failed to hunt, kill, and to win.
The U.S. is deploying a new naval asset worth $4.4 billion, roughly equivalent to the annual defense budget of a small country, to the Pacific. Built with this astronomical sum, the USS Zumwalt DDG-1000 destroyer, constructed with advanced chemistry, algorithms, and steel, has been introduced as the most advanced warship on the global naval stage. Russia, China, and North Korea. These three countries, which want to have a say in the Pacific, are also concerned about this new ship in the face of the US's massive naval power. In fact, Russia, North Korea, and China have good reasons to be wary of the USS Zumwalt. The Zumwalt boasts countless claims, from its hull to its radar signature, and from its weapon systems to its power. In its early years, the USS Zumwalt began to be referred to as a failed ship concept. However, the transformation that began recently, evolving it into a hypersonic attack ship on demand, may be reversing the fate of this ship. And all these modifications to the USS Zumwalt could upset the balance in the Pacific. The ship has considerable potential to do this. The USS Zumwalt's fundamental characteristics could indeed scupper the plans of China, Russia, and North Korea. Upon exploring the ship in much greater depth, it becomes clear that this thinking is correct. Zumwalt-class destroyers are much larger than classic destroyers and were designed with a different technological recipe. But this massive ship must be examined not as a whole, but as a collection of important parts. Size and displacement are the first points to consider. The USS Zumwalt has a displacement of 15,900 tons when fully loaded. The ship's length is recorded as 190 meters, or 610 feet, and its width as 24.6 meters, or 80.7 feet. These are enormous figures. On the other hand, the USS Zumwalt has a tumblehome hull form, meaning it tapers inward above the waterline. This feature was designed to reduce its radar cross-section. As a result of this form, the USS Zumwalt's radar signature can be as low as that of a fishing boat. Stealth and power systems are another distinctive and noteworthy feature of the USS Zumwalt. Thanks to its integrated power system, IPS, the ship can generate large amounts of electricity not only for propulsion, but also for sensors, weapons, and platform systems. Additionally, composite structures embedded in the hull enhance its stealth capabilities. Looking at the USS Zumwalt's weapon systems, things get a little more surprising. Initially, the ship's most important weapon system was two 155mm Advanced Gun Systems, AGS, and the Special Long-Range Land Attack Projectile, LRLAP. However, this projectile program was cancelled, and the AGS function was significantly limited. The USS Zumwalt also has a vertical launch system. This massive ship has approximately 80 Mk-57 PVLS cells. These cells can be loaded with various cruise missiles and air defense missiles such as ESSM. Of course, there is also a downside to all this equipment on the USS Zumwalt. The ship's cost and production numbers became serious problems. Only 3 of the 32 ships originally planned for this class were produced. Prices reached up to $7 to $8 billion per ship. This distribution sparked debate over whether the ship was a success or a pipe dream. So, at first glance, the Zumwalt class appears to be an invisible, powerful, future-ready platform. As with every technological revolution, expectations are high, but implementation is difficult. However, when we consider the anxiety that the final version of the USS Zumwalt causes to the Russia-China-North Korea trio, all these difficulties surrounding the ship can suddenly be forgotten. For the US, blocking this trio in the Pacific is worth its weight in gold. To understand this better, let's imagine a scenario. For example, China could initiate a scenario involving an invasion of Taiwan. This is already an expected invasion attempt. With aircraft carriers, landing ships, and air superiority, China could dominate Taiwan in a very short time. So how would the Zumwalt counter this scenario, and which Chinese military installations could this ship target? The capabilities of the USS Zumwalt are not limited to these critical questions that come to mind. When China intensifies its radar networks along the coasts of the South China Sea and East China Sea, the Zumwalt's low radar signature allows it to approach the target area silently. In other words, it can enter the operational area with a small ship appearance that Chinese radars are not accustomed to. Furthermore, the USS Zumwalt's precision strike capability against land targets could be very effective as a counterforce during China's attempted invasion of Taiwan. One of the primary purposes of the Zumwalt class was land support fire. In this sense, China's fuel terminals, military logistics bases, and air defense radar sites around Taiwan could be targets. The USS Zumwalt can strike these facilities with long-range missiles or newly integrated hypersonic weapons. For example, coastal batteries deployed on the Chinese shores above the Taiwan Strait or port areas where landing ships will travel. The USS Zumwalt also has superior capabilities in disrupting sea landing lines. China's landing ships, transport fleets, and staging areas around Hainan Island prepared for the Taiwan operation could fall under the Zumwalt's radar. If necessary, the Zumwalt can monitor those areas while maintaining line of sight and change the rules of the game with missiles or torpedoes. Once hypersonic weapons are integrated, the USS Zumwalt will become a formidable deterrent against China's invasion attempts on Taiwan. As mentioned, the Zumwalt is currently being equipped with hypersonic weapons. This will enable it to deliver rapid, difficult-to-detect strikes against Taiwan or the Chinese Navy from China's coastline. This forces China to reconsider its plans when it wants to initiate them. Therefore, the USS Zumwalt could become a formidable deterrent in the Taiwan scenario, disrupting China's plans for a large-scale invasion and quick victory. On the other hand, Russia could also face one of its worst nightmares in the region due to the presence of the USS Zumwalt. Now, we are expanding the scene to the Pacific. Russia's Pacific Fleet varies from long-range elements and strategic formations, such as the Khabarovsk-Vladivostok line, to Iskander aircraft carrier ships. The USS Zumwalt could become a very powerful player on this line. The ship's capabilities to access long-range landing and support ships stand out in this regard. Russia is striving to increase its landing capacity from Vladivostok. Thanks to the USS Zumwalt's low visibility and long-range VLS missiles, landing ships or logistical elements could be targeted, weakening Russian backyard protection. Of course, the USS Zumwalt's air defense pressure should not be overlooked. The Russian Pacific Line is protected by Su-35 aircraft and S-400 or S-300 systems. However, the Zumwalt's stealth, electronic warfare capabilities, and new hypersonic integration have the capacity to test Russian air defenses. This also means deterrence for the Russian Navy and Air Force. Submarine and sensor network disruption is another factor that stands in the way of Russia's Pacific objectives. Russia's submarine and reconnaissance networks are important in the Pacific. The Zumwalt can use its sensors to monitor Russian activities and, when necessary, cut off the area and intervene as a force of pressure. Pressure on stalled projects is another response the USS Zumwalt can offer to the Russian Navy in the Pacific. Russia's expansion plans in the Pacific are met with intense naval power from actors such as Japan, South Korea, the US, and Canada. Platforms like the Zumwalt can play a decisive role in this intensity, not globally, but within its sphere of influence. So for Russia, the Zumwalt is not just a ship, nor is it a huge weapons platform. It is the uncertainty it creates. This uncertainty puts the Russian fleet, with its fixed bases and logistical areas, under time pressure. Now is the time to discuss how the USS Zumwalt could deter North Korea in the Pacific. North Korea's ability to establish an active naval force in the Pacific is limited, but it has options such as provocative frigates, torpedo boats, and maritime movements near the border. The USS Zumwalt is highly significant in this context. Although North Korea's ability to take to the seas is relatively low, it still poses a high-risk surprise element for the U.S. The Zumwalt's rapid response options provide deterrence against maritime border violations or small-scale landing operations. When hypersonic capabilities come into play, any action North Korea might initiate from the sea or coastal batteries would be felt early on by the Zumwalt. This reduces Pyongyang's element of surprise. North Korea's own element of surprise is suspended in the air by the presence of platforms like the Zumwalt. This is because North Korea's technological speed or logistical depth is not sufficient to deal with a platform like the Zumwalt. Therefore, for North Korea, the USS Zumwalt may not be a direct rival in the field, but it is a strategic shadow figure, sending Pyongyang the message that it must hide in the Pacific. Now, we need to look at whether these three countries have similar platforms that can counter the Zumwalt and how these platforms compare. Let's start with China. China's Type 055 destroyers and aircraft carriers are among its major naval investments. However, considering the Zumwalt's low radar signature, hypersonic adaptation, and new weapon modifications, China's single ship option with similar capabilities is not currently on par with published information. In this context, the USS Zumwalt could offer a quality advantage over China's newest ships. The outcome remains unchanged when considering Russia. Russia has advanced destroyers and frigates in the Pacific theater, but its global shipbuilding capacity, logistical support chain, and low visibility capabilities lag behind China's. Furthermore, While the USS Zumwalt is undergoing hypersonic weapon modifications, Russian naval programs are reportedly facing increasing challenges with maintenance, parts, and production. The situation is no different in North Korea. North Korea's naval power is very limited. Pyongyang has no ship that could be considered a counterpart to the USS Zumwalt. In summary, the rivals are not at the platform level that provides similar continuity. The USS Zumwalt still stands out for its quality rather than its quantity. However, a warning is needed here. The small number of platforms and the cost burden limit the Zumwalt's ability to be used in multiple areas simultaneously, making it possible for rivals to attempt to achieve balance with a concentrated attack strategy from a single point. Let's paint the big picture here. This is not just about the USS Zumwalt, but about the U.S. Navy's capacity and the combined naval strength of the three rival countries. The U.S. still leads in terms of naval power, submarine capacity, aircraft carrier groups, global logistics network, and naval technologies. Platforms like the USS Zumwalt are seen as indicators of this leadership. But China is growing rapidly. The Beijing regime is massive in terms of its large number of ships, naval construction capacity, base network in the South China Sea, and regional influence. But in terms of quality and innovation, the Chinese Navy lags behind some of the U.S.'s special capabilities. The Russian Navy is traditional in the Pacific, but it is weak in the high-tech race due to logistics, maintenance, and budget pressures. North Korea is a regional threat producer, but has limited naval capacity. Taking all this into account, the predictions for the Pacific over the next 10 to 15 years are as follows. The U.S. will likely use high-quality individual platforms, such as the Zumwalt style, which are rare but lethal elements. China and Russia, on the other hand, may seek advantages through numerical superiority and shadow fleets. As platforms like the Zumwalt enter service, bases, sea lanes, and logistics chains in the region may become riskier for the tripartite alliance. This will also constrain the surprise attack strategies of the China-Russia-North Korea front. However, as mentioned earlier, a single platform is not sufficient for the U.S. The USS Zumwalt's escort system, i.e., its logistics and air support, is critical. The China-Russia front could shift to a high-volume pressure strategy at this point. In other words, they could deploy numerous platforms to the area where the Zumwalt is located. In this scenario, the Zumwalt remaining alone in the field could be risky. Another variable is submarine warfare, unmanned systems, and hypersonic weapons. While the Zumwalt is beginning to integrate hypersonic capabilities, China and Russia are developing different approaches in this area. Therefore, a hypersonic competition may take center stage in the future. Separately, budget constraints, shipbuilding problems, and maintenance delays also pose a risk for the U.S. The low cost and production number of the Zumwalt are not an opportunity, but also a limitation, because to maintain leadership, both quantity and quality are important. Maintaining this balance is difficult. Therefore, the future in the Pacific could unfold as follows. The U.S. in terms of qualified pressure, speed, and creating uncertainty. China in terms of large numbers, regional pressure, and logistical depth. North Korea in terms of high-risk surprises, and Russia in terms of logistical problems and attrition. The Zumwalt partially confirms this picture, but there is no simplification such as world domination with a single ship. Nevertheless, despite all these challenges and opposing forces, the Zumwalt-class destroyer is a platform with both tremendous potential and serious barriers. For China, Russia, and North Korea, this ship alone does not mean game over, but it creates a constant question mark in the game. In terms of the balance of power, we can say the following. The USS Zumwalt is a serious military asset for the U.S., with its technological superiority, low visibility, and hypersonic integration capabilities. This asset can threaten bases, sea lanes, and landing routes in the Pacific. Negative effects, such as high cost, limited number of ships, the previous system's inability to complete the job, and maintenance and logistical burdens also make the Zumwalt vulnerable. If rivals apply pressure in large numbers, the Zumwalt's advantage may be limited. The Zumwalt is not the sole answer to these variables, but it remains an important tool for generating responses. Therefore, while the U.S. maintains its quality advantage, the China-Russia front can leverage volume and regional access advantages. And perhaps the most critical point is this. This wargame is not just about ships, missiles, or the maritime domain, but also about logistics, maintenance, technology, and counter-innovation competition. The Zumwalt class could be an indicator of the U.S.'s quality leap in this new phase, but another reality is that China, Russia, and North Korea are preparing to respond with numerous, low-cost pressure systems in this area. Ultimately, if you are watching the future of the Pacific, You need to see the USS Zumwalt not just as a warship, but as a signal, a challenge, a creator of uncertainty. And for rivals, even this uncertainty is harmful, because uncertainty slows down decision-making. So yes, the Zumwalt could change the entire picture, but this change gains meaning not on its own, but with support and strategy. And while the power of numbers has long been discussed in the Pacific, select models like the Zumwalt are now emerging. This could go down in history as a turning point in the game. Thank you for watching.